The energy in here will carry us through. We're going to carry it on to 2024.
This is such a great day because today is the first day that Kentuckians can get their vote on. For November 7th. You can't stop the revolution. We're here, Kentucky State University.
When black votes are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When civil rights are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
The energy in here will carry us through. We're going to carry it on to 2024.
This is such a great day because today is the first day that Kentuckians can get their vote on. For November 7th. You can't stop the revolution. We're here, Kentucky State University.
When black votes are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When civil rights are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
Everybody, and welcome to this year's Tele-Town Hall sponsored by the Transformative Justice Coalition. We're so excited to welcome you to 2024 and TJC's first Tele-Town Hall of 2024. Let me tell you, I'm Attorney Darrell Jones. I'm the board chair of the Transformative Justice Coalition, and we're so excited that you've decided to join us here for this Tele-Town Hall today. But let me tell you, folks say, it's going to be election season soon. I got news for you. It's election season now. As we're talking, they're caucusing in Iowa. Next week, they'll be in New Hampshire. The race is on. Now is the time to get your vote straight and understand what's going on. But more importantly, on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday, it is time to start our march to the ballot box. And it's also time to try to do what we need to do to stop those that are trying to interfere with that march to the ballot box. And there's a lot going on around the country. PJC is so blessed to have a long bench of talent to draw from. And the panelists we have set for you tonight are some of the brightest minds that are in this country. y'all know Transformative Justice Coalition. We're people that have been in the fight and know the fight. But you know us well enough to know we're going to have that youth voice in there too, and you're going to hear that strongly coming through in this Tele-Town Hall. Now, it would not be me, and it would not be the Transformative Justice Coalition if we did not start with the word from our founder as well as the president of the Transformative Justice Coalition. I refer to her as the Queen Mother of Election Protection. She's none other than, and I say, Attorney General Ellison, I say it all the time, if the Supreme Court would just listen to Barbara Arnwine, we'd be all right. Ladies and gentlemen, Barbara Arnwine.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 2024 National King Day Tele-Town Hall. This has been a great day. We started off at 5 a.m. fasting, everybody. Yes, and by 5 p.m. when the fast was about to end, I was about to fall out. So I'm just so happy that we had a wonderful fast. But what I did was during the time of the fast, those 12 hours, I fed my soul. I watched all kind of incredible videos on Dr. King, from his own speeches, read his own words, saw people's reflections, really enjoyed that, nourished my soul enough for my body to endure until the fast was over. So thank you to everyone who fasted with us today. We'll do it again on April 4th, and we're certainly going to do it on July 17th in honor of the wonderful John Lewis. So there's going to be so much coming up this year. We know that we're in a battle for our lives. While many people were in the holiday season, getting ready for Thanksgiving, getting ready for the high holidays of December, our opponents were at work. They were in the 8th Circuit, cutting off the right of individual plaintiffs injured by unlawful discrimination in voting, cutting off their right to go to court, cutting and to use the Voting Rights Act, the very act that John Lewis, Amelia Boynton, Viola Liozzo, and so many people fought for, people died for. And they're going to say, you can't have access to that right. You can't bring a case, even if you walk into a place that is seeking to deny you your rights. Oh, listen, folks, we are in a battle because 14 attorney generals from 14 other states outside of Arkansas, where this ugly case started, said they filed a friend of the court brief saying that this should be the law of the land. And that's where we're going to talk about a lot today. But mostly we're going to talk about you. How do you stand up in this time? How do we rise up and give our voices to this moment? You see, we're talking about King's legacy today. And when you talk about King's legacy, the number one thing I want everyone to remember is that King's dream that we all talk about, it was meant to be and designed to be a counter argument to the American nightmare of racism that was shackling Black Americans, Latino Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans. It was designed to lift up the need for real, serious, systemic transformation within our society. No Band-Aids, transformation. So the king that people like to talk about, the content of the character king, they forget there's the radical king who talked constantly about where's my check, who talked about reparations when people didn't know what that word was. There's the king who talked about why don't we have guaranteed income for all Americans. There was the king who talked about the necessity of people knowing their history, of sharing Black history so that people have a real understanding of the African legacy and the accomplishments of African Americans in this country, he would have just been appalled at this book banning and all this banning of African American history that's going on. There was the king that was so focused on his three issues of racism, militarism, and materialism that people forget. He gave away all his money, the Nobel Peace Prize, everything. He was so anti-materialistic. There was the king who was depressed, who, fought deep depression because of his, vision and understanding how far the world had to go to achieve it. There was the king that was hounded by the FBI, that was terrorized, and his family terrorized, crosses burned on his lawn in front of his children, all of these things. Yes, he was a human, and yes, there were intersectional flaws in his life, but he was a man of sacrifice, and he was a man who did everything he could to make sure that all of us could stand tall. For that king, we celebrate his legacy today. The question that this panel will address is, where do we go from here? One of his favorite questions. And we will endeavor today to provide you with a lot of great information, and we will hope that you will walk away from tonight feeling inspired, feeling more knowledgeable, and ready to engage, because we're going to roll this year. It's all about the people. It's all about our vote. It's all about our power. And to really make sure that we win, that power has to be fully exercised in so many ways. So with that said, thank you, Daryl Jones, for moderating tonight. And thank you to our incredible panel. I can't wait to hear all of our panelists, all of their thoughts. What a treasure trove we are in. What a blessing. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for those remarks, Barbara. Just, as always, right on point, centering the discussion and knowing exactly where we need to go. And we appreciate that just so incredibly much. The next person we wanted to bring up for some remarks is a person who I don't think really needs an introduction, Barbara. I mean, every time I turn on the television, it seems as though something's happening in Minnesota, and there's Attorney General Keith Ellison right there taking care of it. And he's one of the freedom fighters. He's one of the people that we know as one of the progressive attorney generals, one of the most progressive attorney generals in the United States. Very active with the Democratic Attorney Generals Association nationally. And we heard Barbara speak of the case that's going on in the 8th Circuit federally in Arkansas and dealing with voting rights under the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which would disallow individuals to bring cases when they've been discriminated against in the voting booths, as well as organizations to bring cases when they've been discriminated against in the voting process. Well, one of the states that's encompassed by that 8th Circuit is Minnesota, is the Attorney General's state that he represents. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome up Attorney General Keith Ellison. Attorney General Ellison, all yours, sir.
Thank you for that very generous and warm introduction. And it's such an honor to be with you all colleagues tonight on this night where we celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King. We just remind everybody, the Voting Rights Act really was the beginning of multiracial democracy in America. Before that, we had a racial dictatorship. We did not truly have a democratic society. We had a white democracy. And so the Voting Rights Act, you cannot undercount the importance of this piece of legislation. I know some of you all are thinking, well, what about the 15th Amendment? What about the 19th Amendment? Yeah, the 15th Amendment was pretty much a dead letter when it was passed. And it took the Herculean efforts. And Barbara mentioned people who gave their lives. Let's remember Jimmy Lee Jackson. He was on a nighttime march in Marion, Alabama. He was protesting, and he was shot down and murdered in cold blood by an Alabama state trooper. That provoked John Lewis, Hosea Williams, and many others to have this march from Selma to Montgomery. Then we have March 7th, Bloody Sunday. Then MLK comes in, gets involved, and lends his enormous weight to the effort. And then after getting that court injunction, you all will recall they do have a march, a successful march. And a few days after that march, Viola Liuzzo is murdered by members of the Ku Klux Klan. And many of us have driven down that road between Selma and Montgomery many, many times. Well, President Johnson, he kind of felt like he had already done his civil rights thing. He signed the 64 Act. He had done his bit. But he had another thing coming. By that August, he was signing Voting Rights Act, and democracy exploded. Sheriff Clark, the noted nemesis of civil rights, was voted out within one term. I mean, the real power got redistributed. And now, friends, now they're trying to kill it for good. Of course, Section 5 took a blow in 2013. We know that. And Congress, I spent time in Congress, has been trying to pass good legislation to reinstate that. Again, there's just no basic constitutional infirmity. It's just Scalia said he thought it was something to help Black people, so he was against it, right? And of course, many people who thought our liberal Chief Justice turned out not to be so much. This one is really the death knell of the Voting Rights Act because what it says is that only the U.S. Attorney General will be able to bring cases. Now, do you think Jeff Sessions is going to bring cases? Do you think Bill Barr is going to bring cases? They ain't bringing no cases. And guess what? David Strauss, who's the judge who wrote this horrendous Jim Crow opinion, knows it very, very well. Just so you know, Levitsky Smith is the chief judge of the Eighth Circuit. He was on that 2-1 panel. He made a great dissent. I urge everybody to read it. I'll say this, the Republican AGs are not the only ones in this fight. So are the Dem AGs. And I will tell you, Daryl, please, thank you for saying I'm just one of the most progressive AGs, because I'm certainly not the most. I mean, boy, y'all, look at Tish James, look at Aaron Ford, look at we got some real tigers out there fighting for people's rights, and those are just a few of them. And so we have already filed our amicus brief to expand from the 2-3 panel to the 11-member panel that is pending. We filed that on December 26th. Big thanks to my staff. Pete Perrell's on the call, and him and Angie Barons and others pulled that together with a lot of quickness because they share my passion for this issue. A lot of the people doing great work don't get that much props, y'all. But remember, they're the ones often writing these briefs. So Pete, thanks for being on the call tonight. Few things I want to say. We will see this thing all the way through. We will fight this thing all the way through. But Barbara, I couldn't hug you enough, and because I love you so much. And here's just one more reason why. You understand this is not a lawyer's fight. This is a people's fight. We need mass action. We need mass action. We need mass action. We need everybody. We need to hold meetings about this. We need to tell people this is the reinstatement of Jim Crow. And if you want to look at another important civil rights case, remember when Brown v. Board was argued in '54, there were Latino people in Los Angeles who were locked out of equal education opportunity because of this, along with Native American people. So this really is a multicultural fight. Let's not smallify this fight. Let's bigify this fight. Let's get a big, giant coalition and help people understand, yes, it's about the ballot. It's also about the court. It's also about the street. And we've got to be out there marching, making sure people are ready to go. And so I don't want to take up too much time. I will just say to you, Dem AGs are in this fight. We've already filed our stuff. We're going to keep filing it. We're going to keep fighting. We are locked with you. Bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Attorney General Ellison, always so eloquently stated, but not simply eloquently stated, because people get caught up in the eloquence of the statement and not the substance of what's being said. We appreciate the substance of what you have said, and we appreciate you being in the fight and being a voice in the fight and being unafraid and unapologetic to be that voice in the fight. So we give you great thanks and certainly admiration for all that you do. We have gathered, Barbara, I think one of the best panels that in quite some time. It's just an exciting panel. I'm so excited to welcome them all. You know, we have Denise Lieberman, who is an attorney, who also is with the Missouri Voter Protection Advocate for Advancement Project, and just a litigating attorney. Okay, we're not one of these little policy puff pieces. This is the litigating attorney. When I say litigating attorney, folks, what I mean is, say I'm a litigating attorney. I can say that we're the ones who are in the trenches. So we get in there, and we're the ones that you hear about all these policy stuff. Nah, we're the ones who are in the courtroom fighting for your rights, fighting for where the rubber meets the road, as my grandfather used to say. That's what Denise Lieberman is. She is one of those fighters that's going to be bringing it to you. Exactly, she's going to be able to talk about it. I'm going to come back to Denise because we're going to talk about what this Arkansas decision means practically to each and every one of us potentially. We also have with us Andreas Cabillas. And Andreas, let me tell you folks, I am not a big fan of the state of Florida, but let me tell you, Florida State University has turned out this product in the terms of Andreas Cabillas, and he is just outstanding. He's strong on policy. He's strong on campaign coordination. He's worked with the PERG, the personal research group that's there, and he is just an incredible, young, talented generation, Gen Z, who's going to be bringing it, and I can't wait to get to him. We also have with us, oh my goodness, she's not a Gen Z, but she might as well be because she's right there on all of the issues. She's the president of the League of Women Voters. She's Virginia K. Solomon. Virginia, thank you so much for being with us here this evening. We also have with us, because if you got to have the League of Women Voters, the president of the National Organization for Women going to say, I'm going to be right there too. And they've been with us shoulder to shoulder each time that we've been in battle. We know that we can turn her. Look, Barbara, we don't even have to turn around. All we do is got to look a little bit to the side. There's Christian Nunes, the president of NOW, that'll be standing with us in every fight that we encounter. We're also excited to have with us, Barbara. My goodness, we talk about Gen Z. We talk about, I forgot to say that Andreas was one of our TJC fellows, Barbara. He's also a TJC fellow, right? But we have another TJC fellow, right, that came out before Andreas. And now she's an attorney. She comes out of Chicago, Illinois. She graduated from the University of Illinois in Chicago, honors. She's now with the honors attorney with the Bureau of Prisons federally. She's just one of those people that she's worked with those that have been incarcerated in securing their right to vote. She is a tireless advocate. Folks, you're going to see her on the trail. You're going to hear a lot from her tonight. She's none other than attorney Ashley Shannon. Ashley, welcome aboard. Oh my goodness. Barbara, when we started this fight out, and I started with the Transformative Justice Coalition, I didn't know all the people that you knew. And the more I found out, the deeper it went, the deeper the bench went, the deeper the bench went, the deeper the bench went. And now we're in this fight for the in the Arkansas courts with regards to trying to stop them from being able to block individuals from bringing suit. And we are so blessed to have one of the people that is now the chairman of our communications committee in dealing with this fight. She's a consultant from the CR team. She's also a strategic organizer, just an ideal person for this position. We're going to welcome her comments shortly. She's none other than attorney Cynthia Robbins. Cynthia, welcome aboard. Folks, let me tell you, when we get out, and Barbara and I have been in the streets out there pushing for people to get to the polls and being certain that they have access to the polls. We're getting all kinds of trouble. We got dogs coming after us. We got, what else, Barbara? We got all kinds of stuff coming after us every place we go, whether we're in Georgia, we're in Jackson, Mississippi, wherever we are, Florida, we see the police called on us. We are so fortunate to have with us one of the backbones. We know if we need to go into the courtroom that we're covered because the National Bar Association has been by our side, has got our back, and is in there helping people being certain they secure their right to vote and get access to the ballot booth. We're so excited to have with us the president of the National Bar Association, Dominique Calhoun. Dominique, welcome aboard. Welcome aboard. And Barbara, they say you save family for last, right? So. Oh
yeah, that's.
So it's always great to know, and this time we're by Zoom. So my immediate family is all very excited because they know I'm not going to jail because every time I get around the president for Black Voters Matter, they usually end up getting a call saying he's locked up again because they've been acting up, showing up, fighting for voting rights somewhere in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, we're so excited to have with us the co-founder of the Black Voters Matter, Cliff Albright. Cliff, welcome, welcome, welcome. Well, let's kick this off. And, Cliff, I want to go and jump right in and get you.
I love the National Bar and all the incredible work that Dominique Calhoun does as head of the National Bar Association. Thank you, Dominique. Thank you.
Yeah.
We love you. Thank you. And for that great, cadre of lawyers you bring to our rescue all the time. Thank you, sir.
So, today's march to the ballot box is no longer simply about registering and voting, right? Today's march to the ballot box is full of all this different type of trickery that we've seen going on. They're, removing people from voting polls. They're demanding proof of identity, exact name matches. So when you register to vote and you're 18, your signature needs to match now that you're 72. If it's changed, and trying to disallow you from being able to exercise that right. And those are really just a few of them, because we have absentee ballot problems that are going on and everything else. So Cliff, I wanted to start with you. What can be done to counter all this voter suppression tactics that we see happening? And are we really that far removed and better off than we were prior to the Voting Rights Act of '65 and all that King fought for?
Hey, thank you so much, Daryl and Barbara, for having me on this very important Tele-Town Hall on this very important day, right? As we of course recognize Dr. King, his life and all the work that he did, and here we are, continuing that work, particularly in regards to this topic of voting rights, right? And so, let us not forget, the questions that Dr. King asked, after the Selma to Montgomery March, when they reached Montgomery and he gave his famous speech where he asked the question, how long, right? And of course the crowd would respond, not long, right? How long do we have to deal with denial of our rights? And so it's very relevant that we're talking about this topic here today. You asked what can be done about the voter suppression that we're facing in all of these states. And, there's a couple of different strategies that we can have, right? On the one hand, an important piece of countering it is always just to communicate with our folks around what's going on. Like, what are these new laws? What is the new types of suppressions? What are the new things that we have to stay away from? And just trying to make sure that if we can't stop what they're doing, then at least we need to find a way to educate ourselves and then to even turn it into the offensive, right? And so that's one piece of how we motivate our folks. So that's how we educate our folks to counter the voter suppression. Another way that we try to counter the suppression in some of these states is to try to find other tactics, other policies, or other issues that we can use to counteract the impact of the voter suppression. And so, take for example our good friends in New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, who just were able to get passed in Newark, New Jersey, a law some of y'all may know, right? A law that says 16 and 17-year-olds can now vote on school board elections, right? Because at the end of the day, why would you not have the very people that are most impacted by school board policies not able to have any kind of say in what's going on in their schools, what's going on with police harassment, what's going on with gun violence, what's going on just with the curriculum, right? And so, but what that is it's also an on-ramp to get more people involved in the discussion, to get younger people involved in discussions. There's tactics like that, there's ballot initiatives, but there are other things, there are things that we can do to counteract a little bit some of the suppression that we're seeing. I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that, with all these lawyers that we got here on this call, that I didn't mention that there's also a legal strategy, right? At Black Voters Matter, we love to sue some of these states. We've sued Georgia 2-3 times. We've sued Florida a couple times. Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and you gotta have the legal strategy. That's why we're always glad to roll with you all and all the other folks that are on this call and some others that aren't here, because our movements have always been fueled, and especially our voting rights movements have always been fueled with a grassroots organizing strategy, but also with a legal strategy, right? Again, we gotta always remember the Montgomery bus boycott technically was not the thing that ended segregation on the buses, right? Technically, what ended the segregation on the buses was Browder versus Gale, right? It was the case that made it to the Supreme Court that ended segregation on those buses. Now, can that case have been as successful without the year-long organizing and boycott that took place? Maybe not, right? Similarly, though, without that case, then that boycotting on its own may not have gotten there. It's the power of those things together. And so what we try to do and what many of our partners try to do is to merge the grassroots organizing and advocacy, but also having some incredible legal partners that help us to get the job done. And then the last thing I'll say is this, in terms of overcoming this voter suppression. Oh, two things. Real quick, fighting for federal legislation to counteract what we're seeing happening in the states, and we'll probably have some more questions about that a little bit later on. But I didn't want to leave out the importance of the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And then the fifth thing and very last thing that I'll say is that at the end of the day, probably the most important thing and the thing that really drives all those other four that I just talked about is that we got to get our folks to believe that we've got the power to get this done. Right? We've got to center our work in love and hope and even some joy. But we got to believe that we've got the power to get this done. Because again, on this King Day, I always like to remember people what Dr. King, or remind people what Dr. King said about power. He said, love without power is reckless and abusive, right? Power without love is reckless and abusive, but love without power is sentimental and anemic. And we've got to have both. And we have both. And we just got to believe in that love and believe in that power. And if we do that, then we can overcome what these states have been throwing at us.
Amen. Amen. Preach, Brother Albright. Preach.
I know that was a much longer answer than you.
Hey, you better be lucky I'm not getting up and praising and dancing. Thank you. That was awesome.
And Cliff always gives just really arousing responses, but very thoughtful and reflective, understanding of where we are, where we've come from, and what we are now encountering. And I've got to ask you, Virginia K. Solomon, you're the president of the League of Women Voters. You're there on the street, with us out there in the streets, registering voters all across the country. What are some of the obstacles that you're running into, that you're discovering as your organization across this country are trying to register people to vote?
Well, first of all, happy Dr. King Day. If you don't mind, though, there's a quote for me, because Mrs. Coretta Scott King was not a prop, and she was equally as important to his success as a leader to me. And so she said that freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. And I will add that to my response, because in reality, it hasn't been won. The fight for voting rights will continue as long as there are oppressors, as long as white supremacy exists, as long as we have to fight for equality in this country. That fight will continue. And we know that there are a whole lot of people out there who are just don't want to give up power, don't want to share it, don't think we can bake a bigger pie so that we can all eat. But at the League of Women Voters, one of the challenges that we've seen consistently is around registration of voters. Voter registration has just been under attack. The criminalization of voter registration is something that has been now become a consequence for third-party voter registration in this country. And it is sad, but let's be very clear. There are people, because they fear the power of Black and Brown communities. They fear the power of women. They fear the power of us collectively coming together and being able to exercise our voices at the ballot box. And so that's why they're trying to criminalize. We actually have 3 lawsuits right now pending in federal court, and I can't get into the details about it. We're not supposed to talk about pending litigation, but what I can say is that we're fighting back at the ballot box, trying to make sure that everybody has access to be registered to vote. And you know, the thing is, we're the largest on-the-ground partner for National Voter Registration Day. And it's interesting that they would choose third-party voter registration. You see so many organizations like ours. And I will say groups from the Divine Nine, you see Black Voters Matter, you see Transformative Justice, right? We're all out there trying to register voters because we know that we are taking, we're going to people who normally wouldn't proactively go out to register to vote, or might not have access because they live in a rural community, or for whatever reason, they haven't been registered to vote. They don't even know the rules around how they can vote. And you know what? The reason that we are under attack and voter registration is under attack is because when we vote, we win.
Yes.
People register to vote and they show up at the polls.
Yes.
And so the important thing I would say, and Cliff talked a little bit about this earlier, is remaining vigilant. We have to elect officials who will not pass this nonsense legislation. We have to be able to fight back. And the importance of federal voting rights legislation is really critical right now. The Freedom to Vote Act was reintroduced by Representative Sarbanes a few months back. And it was really important piece of legislation because it would make automatic voter registration kind of the law of the land. It would make it easier for people to register to vote. I would rather the League of Women Voters didn't have to have third-party voter registration because it was so easy. People were automatically registered and it wasn't necessary. But unfortunately, that is not the case. And so with these lawsuits, we're going to be fighting back to make sure that third-party voter registration is still active. But know that the only way we can do that is if we make sure that we're getting the right people elected to office so that these bad laws can't continue to be put forward.
Amen.
And thank you so much for that, Virginia K. Solomon. Really appreciate it. And you know, you always bring such insight to this discussion, and talking about the right that we bring from the laws that are being passed locally, state level. So sometimes the fight is right there on the state level. We don't necessarily have to be in the halls of Congress, although, as you've indicated, the halls of Congress can prevent the states from passing some of these laws. If they pass, and we're going to talk about that federal, the Freedom to Vote Act, as well as the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, both of which would address it. But you also mentioned, and I only get a choice of a couple, but you also mentioned the involvement of other organizations like the Divine Nine. So when I think of Divine Nine, I got to go to one of my divine brothers here to talk about that, because there is a Greek brother we have here, Dominique Calhoun, who's the president of the National Bar Association. And Dominique, I've got to ask you, 2020 was a contentious election. We had, in Virginia, we had guns at polls. We had all kinds of people walking around with long black leather stuff, intimidating voters, doing all of this stuff that was going on at polling places. Yeah. We know that 2024 stands to be even more contentious than 2020. So, we just wonder how much more we're going to see for the individual voter at the voting ballot when they're going to cast their ballots. Can you share with us, what you think the best role is? Because you have I'm part of the National Bar Association. We have 66,000 of us, Black lawyers in the nation represent.
67.
We're up another 1,000, 67,000 Black attorneys across the bar, across the country that are involved here and have the ability to be active here and play a role and to assist accessing ballot boxes. Share with us, what should Black lawyers be doing? What is the National Bar Association doing? What should Black lawyers be doing to help secure that right to vote?
Well, and Brother Jones, I appreciate the thought here. Number one, we got to get back in the fight. There is a time that we have to remember where we came from. And I think that that time is critical to be right now. I'm currently in Philadelphia, joining you all from a hotel room here. I am a native citizen, and this whole King weekend, I have been all over this country. I was in LA, I flew to DC. I'm currently in Philadelphia. I'll leave here and go down to Florida. The point of it is that King sacrificed himself for a cause, and the people before him did the same. The National Bar Association was created in 1925 because Black lawyers weren't allowed, discriminated against by the ABA from joining the ranks, from being barristers, from having the ability to bring cases before any jurisdiction. Now you got to remember how important that is. That was our fight. That was the initial fight, is to get, hey, and he knows it. That dog knows. That was the initial fight. He was preaching right along with me, Brother Jones. The initial fight was to allow the barristers in the courtroom. Now that you have people who understand the plight, that can argue and articulate the problems that are before them, they can understand the issue. Now, if that was the first fight, is that you can get barristers to present before the court. Now imagine that you get judges on the bench. And if you get judges on the bench, then the judges can understand the circumstances and the plight. That is what the National Bar Association does. We train, we ensure that the people are prepared for the fight upcoming. Now, let me tell you what the National Bar Association will do. We've partnered alongside the other national bar associations, the Hispanic National Bar Association, NAPABA, the Association for the Blind Federation of Lawyers, the American Bar Association, the National Association of Women Lawyers, the National LGBTQ plus Bar Association, and the National South Asian Bar Association. The 8 of us, we're going to come together. And just what you're talking about, the issues that all of you deal with when you're talking about organizing and ensuring that people understand what their rights are. Imagine that all of the lawyers from all of these bar associations come together and say, here is what the actual laws for voting, the actual laws for registering to vote exist and look like within your jurisdiction. Imagine that these lawyers will volunteer their time and say that we will go to Texas, to California, to New York, to Florida, wherever they are, and ensure that we put together a national website, a repository that you can easily go to and figure out what the law is in that jurisdiction. And now when you're organizing and you're putting people boots on the ground, or you're getting people to the ballot box, they know exactly what those issues are, that they could address them right there. So when you call in to your national hotline and you have that conversation with someone, you get a lawyer from any of these bar associations, not partisan, not political. It just tells you what the law is within that jurisdiction. Imagine how that tends to ease the concern of what's going on around the nation. We're trying to put back the confidence in the voting process, the confidence that you can have. This is an issue that we all see, regardless of our racial ethnicity, regardless of our gender. There is continued miscommunication, and it will happen again in this process. With the age of social media, there's no fact check. There's nobody that will say, I am going to immediately disavow this information before it gets 100,000 likes, before it gets 500,000 likes. And now that information is out there. We're trying to make sure that people understand what their rights are. And so the Bar Association will continue, although we don't normally file the litigation that puts it out. We train the lawyers to make sure that they're prepared to do it. And we inform those judges of the issues that are coming up before them. So we stand as a partner with you, and we'll continue to be a partner with you. And I know, Barbara, you've been amazing with us. Lynn Whitfield is the chair of our election protection program. We put lawyers on the ground. We put boots on the ground to ensure that we're protecting everybody's right to vote.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Calhoun. And, Barbara, one of the things that President Calhoun, I think, certainly adeptly raises is that he travels around the country. And wherever there are hotspots, he's there. And he's encouraging the Black lawyers to get involved and to come out in those hotspots to learn. You don't have to know initially when you're coming out, but once you get involved, Lynn Whitfield, as he was making a reference to with the election protection from the National Bar Association, can give you the materials that you need to learn so that you can be on that front, certainly representing and helping people gain access to the ballot box. One of the entities, one of the blocks of voters that have been most targeted have been young voters. And I don't know if there's another group of voters, say maybe seniors from Georgia and the Georgia runoff, that have been as targeted. We know, Andreas Sebelius, that Gen Z voters are specifically targeted. There are campaigns out to try to stop them from voting, to actively stop them from voting. They go from removing polling places from college campuses so they can't get access to as easy to be able to vote. They deal with absentee ballot access, making it more difficult. All kinds of ID requirements that are there, including restricting Dropbox access to make it difficult for young voters to be able to get that opportunity to express their vote. But you've been successful in getting young people out to the polls at Florida State University and elsewhere. Could you share with our audience what your experience has been regarding registering younger voters and overcoming the challenges that have been presented specifically from the state of Florida since you're in the state of Florida?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Daryl and Barbara, for having me on this Tele-Town Hall. I am so blessed and honored to be here on a town hall with so many incredible figures. Also on me just being a young person, a Gen Z member, it really is an incredible experience seeing all these wonderful advocates also on the page here with us. Now, I will say, Daryl, we did have a very big win here at FSU. We were able to actually get a polling location onto our campus, moving it from the stadium back to the center of campus, where as many students are going to be able to access it as possible. It's right in the heart of our campus, in our student union. And if there are any other young advocates watching, I would highly encourage you to work hard, get an on-campus polling location, because you will see a dramatic increase in student turnout. But now speaking more so to how Gen Zers are being specifically targeted by conservative legislators, I think you laid it out perfectly. There are attempts to dissuade, complicate, or discourage our participation in as many elections as possible. We've seen it in Texas, where they've tried to remove polling locations from college campuses, as well as drop-in boxes for their election ballots. In Ohio and in Georgia, student IDs are not recognized as a valid form of ID, even though it has their face, their signature, where they're living. It's just a matter of trying to prevent students from being able to vote. Now, here in Florida specifically, we have seen a barrage of anti-democratic legislation trying to prevent young people from voting. The biggest one being in 2021 with SB 70. SB 70 did four major things. One, it forced more vote by mail requests to happen by retroactively canceling voters' existing vote by mail requests. So prior to the legislation, if you had requested a mail-in ballot and you were waiting for your ballot to come in and it hadn't come in yet, if it hadn't come in and this legislation was passed, you now would have to re-register or re-request your mail-in ballot. It also criminalized asking friends or caregivers to pick up or drop off a vote by mail ballot, something that many Floridians with disabilities or who are not able really suffered from, especially with the 2022 midterms. And it also eliminated secure vote by mail drop boxes for more than 1 million Floridians. This was all found on the ACLU's website. I would encourage our viewers to read up on this piece of legislation. But most recently, we had SB 7050. Now, SB 7050 specifically targeted third-party voter registration organizations. That's groups like the Student Purge, the League of Women Voters, and this was frankly one of the most targeted attacks on minority and youth voters that the Florida legislator could have implemented. In Florida, people of color are 5 times more likely to rely on third-party voter organizations compared to white people. And so that has a dramatic impact on the voting ability of minority voters in Florida, especially when so many are living in our state who are wanting to vote, wanting to participate. That also affecting our Gen Zers. Now, on the more technical side, it also impacts our third-party voter registration organizations. It requires annual re-registration for every election cycle. It increased the total fine that many organizations could face from $50,000 to over $250,000, which can be absolutely crippling, especially for 501c3s who are working on college campuses, who are working off a very minimal budget, or who don't have a budget at all, or just built up a team of small but hardworking volunteers. Now, when it comes to my experience in Florida has definitely been difficult when it comes to registering people. Training and planning are the most important elements to any voter registration event that we've been hosting. We probably spend more time preparing and planning a voter registration event than any other type of event, just to ensure that we are in line with all forms of legislation that have been coming out of Florida. We have had, the hard task of overcoming these challenges. One of the things that we have been focusing on is virtual voter registration, just eliminating paper ballots. It eliminates paper mistakes. It also helps us to fast track registration. It gives individuals the ability to register on their own time. What we would do is just slap it onto a QR code and walk around campus, just registering students as we went along, meeting people as they went. We also did a lot of class announcements and drop-ins, which gives a guaranteed audience of 20 to 200 students, really helped develop the civic culture of FSU. And then finally, we had to rely on sponsors to help fund our events. A huge shout out to the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee. They have been absolutely incredible in supporting my work and the work of other advocates in Florida. They have helped train us. They have provided volunteer opportunities. They've even helped us financially by funding some of our organizations. And so the three biggest solutions that I would say to this large-scale problem of trying to disenfranchise the youth vote is threefold. One, having an on-campus voting location. Easy solution, access to so many students who are already on campus. Two, voter registration during new student orientation. Many 18-year-olds do not register to vote when they turn 18. And so having them there immediately when they're getting oriented to their campus is a really great way to register as many students as possible. And then lastly, if you live in a state where a voter ID is required, include student IDs as a valid form of voter ID. Many of our out-of-state students do not have a Florida license, but they do have their FSU ID. So making sure that student IDs are a valid form is also a really great way of overcoming these challenges that we're going to start seeing across the country.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Andreas. And when we talk specifically, Barbara, about the student voters, and we're talking about different voting blocks, really, is what we're venturing into when we talk about our younger voters. But another recent block of voters that are turning out, and we're seeing this incredibly high number. Christian Nunes, president of NOW, one of the things that we're seeing is as a result of the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision. We're seeing a very specific block of women voters and men voters that are now what they're calling the Dobbs voters, those that are voting on the reproduction rights. I don't think any clearer case exists than in the state of Ohio, where in Ohio, of the African Americans voting, 84% supported that amendment that would protect a woman's reproductive rights. Is it a mistake when folks are trying to not pay sufficient homage to the impact of the Dobbs voter, and what is NOW doing to marshal that energy to the voting box?
Thank you for that question, Daryl, and thank you, Barbara and Daryl, for having me on this town hall on a very important day to talk about our rights and democracy. I first would like to say that I think that we all have to understand that when we're talking about reproductive rights and voting rights, there's the nexus between the two of them. They are interconnected. You cannot really talk about or try to separate voting rights from reproductive rights, especially when we're talking about the fact that Black and Brown women are the ones who carry the biggest burden when it comes to those who are affected by losing having voting suppression, as well as losing their reproductive rights, and the impact of the laws that are happening with abortion bans and the criminalization of abortion bans in the states. And you brought up a good case when you talk about Ohio. Ohio voters turned out 84%, a lot of those are Black and Brown women, but we just saw in December a case for Brittany Watts where they tried to charge a woman, this young woman, with a felony for miscarriage because of the abortion bans that are happening in Ohio, as if she had control over her body's ability to, like she had control over having a miscarriage. And that's one of the things they're seeing, is that when we talk about the impact of abortion bans, we're talking about marginalized communities, we're talking about Black and Brown BIPOC communities, we're talking about those who are facing and are on the poverty line. Those are the ones who are most impacted. And those are also the ones we see most impacted when we're talking about voter suppression and voting laws as well. So there's a direct connection. And we also have to talk about the extremists, the conservatives, and white supremacy, and their strategy that they have tried to do for a very long time, and how that is connected as well. And their goal is to truly oppress and take away voting rights and maintain power. And what better way can you maintain power if you can get rid of those people who are really have been leading democracy, right? We know Black women have been really taking and showing up for voting and really kind of helping democracy. But if you can take away people and eliminate them by either criminalizing them, getting them arrested, giving them charges, removing their ability to have their rights, and you can maintain more power that way. So this has been a long strategy that we've seen happen for a very long time. And we cannot deny it. We cannot turn our backs on it. We have to understand the importance. And also, just truly, reproductive rights is more than abortion access as well. It's OBGYN care. It is access to, maternal care. It's access to even one to be able to do family planning. And to be able to take those rights from people, to be able to say you can't have birth control as well, to be able to take your right to make choices for your bodily autonomy away from you. It's just another form of oppression to get people to a place of desperation where they cannot have control over themselves. What we're seeing with voting rights as well. This is the same formula, it's the same strategy. And so we cannot recognize that, and we don't identify that same strategy, and the same people applying the same strategy, we're neglecting to really help our communities.
Thank you so much for that, Christian. And Ashley Shannon, we're talking about issue voters is what Christian was talking about, and she was talking about the fight that's there and how it can be used to overcome the obstacle of issue-oriented voting. One of the things that we know, and you're again one of those Gen Zs, young millennials that's on this panel, are really outspoken, and we appreciate that. We know that as of this year, the largest potential voting bloc of American voters are young millennials and Gen Zs. The largest potential bloc are them. But we also know that there's a concerted campaign that's underway, trying to dissuade, discourage, frustrate. They call it the Don't Vote, No Vote campaign, saying, y'all don't vote, it's not worth the time, it's not worth the aggravation, you ain't gonna get anything out of it, and all of that's going on. Similarly, I'm gonna tie this together. Similarly, you're working with the Bureau of Prisons, and you've been working with people that have been incarcerated. And we know that there has been voter intimidation for that large block of voters that would have the ability to vote, but are afraid to vote because they're afraid they may get rearrested if they register and they don't have that right to vote. Could you share with us, some strategies, some thoughts about, that Gen Z concept of the don't vote, won't vote, no vote, as well as the efforts specific from places like Florida that try to criminalize and intimidate those that are returning citizens from exercising that right to vote.
Right. Well, thank you, Attorney Jones, and thank you all for allowing me to be here again. If you are not a TJC fellow, if you are not in charge, we have an upcoming training in April. I want to hype up, quick promotion moment. I wouldn't be here doing the work I do without TJC, so just have to shout that out for you all. But what I will say, I'm going to attack this from two approaches as quickly as I can. One being to start with the Gen Z and millennial movement. Now, as we know in the last election, we came out strong. We put people in office, and I'm saying we because we came out to the polls. We were registering people on the streets to vote. We were picking up seniors in buses and cars and taking them to vote. And why were we doing this? Because we had an agenda that was set. And if the current people in office could not fulfill that agenda, we didn't want them in office. What was that agenda? That was the right for the woman to have access and say over her body, right? That was the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment, right? That was the right to prevent guns in certain institutions in our country. And with all of these things on our agenda, we had this mindset: if I want my agenda to be fulfilled, then I need someone in office that will fulfill that agenda. So we showed up to the polls and did exactly that. But I'll never forget the first day in my training with TJC, and they asked us, why do you think Gen Z and millennials were hesitant to participate in the political process prior? And our responses tended to be, there was a lack of respect and there was a generational divide, right? And that being, if I am showing up to the polls and I'm handing you my agenda and you are not fulfilling it, why is that? And why would I put you back in office? And so now we're in a climate where obviously there's this conflict and there's this war going on. And we're saying we don't want our dollars to go here. We want them to go here. We want the government to do this, yet you're doing this. And in the process, we're seeing this divide among generations and what we're asking for to be placed on that agenda. And because of that divide, the same people sitting in office right now, we don't want them back in office. But Gen Z and millennials, there have been among the few, and I want to say few, there have been a few that have come out saying, well, our response to that is, let's not show up to the polls. Let's not vote. Why is that a problem? It is not an absolute resolution to just not show up to the polls. The resolution is, I'm going to show up, but I'm going to show up to vote for somebody else. I'm going to find someone else to be in that seat for my community that will represent my views. And if I can't find anyone else to do it, then I'm going to run myself. And so I think this whole no vote movement is just honestly a trap and giving into rhetoric that has been pushed out by opposing sides trying to get us not to vote by putting money into campaigns to keep us from the polls. Do not be tricked, young people. They can afford to trick you into believing you should not show up, but we need you at the polls. Now, very quickly, on the felony disenfranchisement side, I'm going to say we need to restore the vote to those incarcerated during and after incarceration. Why is that? There is nothing out there that should cause us to believe that those incarcerated are not still valuable members in our society, right? We need a restorative justice approach that says we still see value in you as a community member, so we still need you to participate in the political process. We know the process of the 13th Amendment as well as the 15th Amendment and how we got to indentured servitude. If I can legalize your slavery, I can strip you of certain rights that you are owed. One being the right to vote, though. Why is there this belief that just because you were formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated, you are less of a human being in this country? There's nothing to cause us to believe that, right? And so we have to have this approach that in restoration, meaning I'm paying back society. There should not be a dollar amount that keeps me from voting. There should not be a crime I committed that keeps me from voting. We have to take the label of inmate off of people's foreheads, and we have to give them human being back. We're no longer 3/5 of a person. They deserve full value of a person. And that is the right, just like Cliff Albright discussed, children to vote on the things that affect them in their schools. Incarcerated individuals also deserve the right to vote on what affects them as well. And with that, I'm going to yield. But again, protect the vote, show up to the polls. We need you.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ashley. And certainly a big shout out to Washington, D.C., which should be a state, Vermont and Maine, which are the three areas that you never lose that right to vote. And that should be across the country, not just those three.
And Daryl, that's why we want the Freedom to Vote Act. Because it restores the right to vote to all formerly incarcerated people. Back to you.
Thanks, Barbara. And Denise Lieberman, we've talked about what's happening in Arkansas, which directly affects Missouri, directly affects several of those states that are right there together, and Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, affects all of those states. Could you share with our audience a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about the Arkansas case and kicking Black and brown people out the courtroom unless the Attorney General says it's all right to take it forward.
The U.S. Attorney General.
Yeah.
U.S. Attorney.
Yeah, absolutely. Daryl, it is an extraordinary case. And it's an extraordinary case even in light of the wholesale assault on our freedom to vote that we have seen, well, really since the dawn of this country, but especially over the last decade, since the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act a decade ago in Shelby v. Holder, cutting off the rule that said that communities had to have the federal government pre-clear any new voting changes to make sure they weren't racially retrogressive. With that gone, immediately 3/4 of the formerly covered states began enacting and proposing racially discriminatory voting laws. And that then spread out throughout the country. And now, not only have we seen the Voting Rights Act weakened and weakened and weakened, making it much harder to prevail in cases, but now literally a federal appellate court has kicked the voters out of the courthouse. It is absolutely extraordinary. And it's particularly extraordinary given that the state of Arkansas didn't even ask them to do that. They did it on their own, number one. Number two, how are you supposed to challenge discriminatory voting laws? How are you supposed to enforce the Voting Rights Act if you are literally shut out of the courthouse? You know, we cannot rely on the federal government alone to bring these cases. We know the history of this country. The whole reason the Voting Rights Act exists is because for over 100 years after we ratified the 15th Amendment, which is intended to guarantee that the right to vote cannot be denied or abridged on account of race, the federal government wasn't enforcing it. The federal government wasn't enforcing it. And that is why people marched, and that is why people fought, and that is why people bled, and that is why people died to pass the Voting Rights Act, to be an act of the people, to give the people the ability to challenge these laws. And I have to say, there was a dissent in the Eighth Circuit's opinion. It was before a 3-judge panel. And the Chief Judge, Judge Smith, who dissented, said something really important. He said that rights so foundational to self-government and citizenship should not depend solely on the discretion or the availability of the government agents for protection. And listen, history bears this out. We know that over 90% of the challenges that have been brought to racially discriminatory voting laws that we've seen an uptick in over the last decade, like photo ID requirements, like discriminatory voter registration restrictions, like efforts to keep formerly incarcerated people off the voter rolls. 90% of these legal challenges have been brought by voters and the organizations that represent them, like the NAACP, like the League of Women Voters. And the truth of the matter is, how do we expect the Attorney General of the United States to be able to know what is going on, especially in communities like Arkansas, places that are other places within the Eighth Circuit that are in the heartland of our country? I'm here in St. Louis. You see behind me the St. Louis Arch, but what you also see behind me in this photo is the old courthouse, which is where the Dred Scott trial took place. Mm-hmm. We have been living in we are living today the impacts of the history of cases like Dred Scott that said that African Americans are not full citizens. We are living in that history of the demise of the Voting Rights Act that hits hardest on communities of color and hits hardest in places like the Heartland. And we are now being told we are not welcome in the courthouse. And this has the potential to really be the final nail in the coffin of the Voting Rights Act, which is exactly what it's intended to do. But I have hope and I have optimism. Already in this case, we're seeing people rise up across the country, not just in the heartland of America, in places like Arkansas and Missouri that many of you may sort of look over, but we're seeing it all over. And Dr. Armwine mentioned at the beginning that attorneys general had filed briefs supporting this closing of the courthouse doors. Well, we're also seeing leaders speak out in favor of the right to bring these cases. There was a friend of the court brief filed in this case by over a dozen cities and mayors, including Missouri's own Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas and other mayors of color who said, we wouldn't even have been elected but for the Voting Rights Act. The people who live in our cities would not be represented without the Voting Rights Act and without the ability to bring these cases. We all know that communities of color, Black voters, brown voters, know best how laws affect them. That's the whole reason that we've heard from the National Bar Association, train people up so that there is greater representation in the judiciary, in the bar. People know best how these laws affect them, and that's why they are the people that need to be able to have the courthouse doors opened to them.
Amen.
And, you know, Martin Luther King, I'm going to end with this, said, this is so poignant in his Give Us the Ballot speech in 1957. So long as I do not firmly and irrevocably possess the right to vote, I do not possess myself. I cannot make up my mind that it's made up for me. I cannot live as a democratic citizen, observing the laws I've helped to enact. I can only submit to the edict of others. This case is an invitation to send people back to second-class citizenship and deny their voice, but we can fight back if we speak out. And that's, of course, what we've seen throughout history is the remedy. We have to take to the streets. We have to take to the sounding boards, and we have to push those courthouse doors back open.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much for that, Denise. And Cynthia Robbins, I gotta come to you on this. And you know, it's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, this is really it, right? We have this going on in Arkansas, and you gotta ask the question. Think about this, and just tell me if I'm wrong. You're an attorney. Tell me if I'm wrong. If you're in Missouri or Minnesota, and you go to a voting place, and you're going to cast your ballot, and there's an effigy of a Black person hanging with a sign that says, don't vote. You don't have a claim under Section 2 that you can bring as an individual to say that they're trying to intimidate you and stop you from voting. You're part of this communications effort. People don't know what's going on. How do you get the message out? How do they find out? And do you think, and this goes to the whole panel, where does this put us in Dr. King's dream?
I too want to add my thanks to the Transformative Justice Coalition and its leaders, Barbara and Daryl, for inviting me to participate tonight and for bringing together this august panel, and all the people who are watching now and who will watch as it's recorded. There are many things that have been said, but what's key here is that this panel, this effort today on the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Action 2024 is a time to galvanize support for protecting our vote. And we all have a role to play. I too actually have been a litigator in the courtroom in civil rights cases and in criminal defense matters. And I'm a life member of the National Bar Association, but I personally have never done any litigation around voting rights. I know about voting rights because I am a citizen of the United States of America, and I understand historically how important it is to vote. And the fact that there are all of these efforts to suppress our vote is a little clue to us that our vote matters. So we have to protect our vote. Our communications committee, many of the wonderful people on this panel actually have been leaders in this communications committee in the Transformative Justice Coalition, trying to bring light to this Eighth Circuit matter. Ironically, the decision was rendered by the three-judge panel on the 20th of November, which people may remember was the Monday before Thanksgiving. That's not accidental. It was an effort to split this change, this dramatic change, after 58 years of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 being in effect. Suddenly, sua sponte, a judge is on his own, not even brought by the parties in the case, said, well, wait a minute, but individuals and organizations can't litigate under the Voting Rights Act. It's huge that he would just on his own offer this, but he was actually following up on a note in a Supreme Court opinion that was a signal to conservative justices that they might try and block this last key part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So it's really critically important that this is all linked up with the effort to get new voting rights federal legislation so that efficiently we can reinstate through the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, we can shore up the things that were working in voting rights legislation. And with the Freedom to Vote Act, we can make it easy for this fundamental right to be exercised. I just want to note that we had a little inkling. Ironically, a global pandemic created the conditions where we actually got to see efficient early voting, absentee voting, ballot boxes that were around, all of these supports that made it easier for people to vote since we were all confined. And that was scary to those who don't love democracy. But we've now had a taste of what it could be if the Freedom to Vote Act and those kind of provisions became the law of the land. So we have to fight to make that happen.
Thank you.
I just want to say one other thing.
Thank you.
The TJC Fellows Program, I'm a little over the age limit because I understand it's 18 to 34. But if I were not, after seeing these folks and the people who are on our committee and the people who are doing work throughout the Transformative Justice Coalition, I would sign up. January 26th is the deadline. It is an extraordinary opportunity. We see what leadership it cultivates and supports. So get your applications in and spread the word to everybody you know who's between the ages of 18 and 34.
Amen.
Andres and Ashley. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Cynthia. And Barbara, I know you wanted to get in here. Come on.
Oh, well, actually, I want everyone to get in because I know people are still on, Cliff, Keith, a lot of people. So let's, talk generally, folks, about what's going on. Why don't we talk about some of our favorite strategies, right? For what people can do right now. I want to thank all the Facebook people. Thank you for all the questions you've been sending over. And I know we've been, trying to answer some of those, but we want to just, keep emphasizing, keep asking your questions. We'll try to get to every one of them to answer. But thank you so much for all your participation. I just want to point out one thing. I've been watching panels, services, and everything for the last several days, because people have been talking about King Day since, Thursday, Friday. And I have noticed that this is one of the few panels where we have Gen Z voices, where I'm actually seeing young people speaking, and more than one. And I am so glad that, that we're doing this, and we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep bringing this because we got to highlight youth voices. Yes, folks, somebody in the audience asked 2 questions. One, are primaries important? Absolutely. We believe in primaries. We must do primaries. Somebody asked, does the NBA work with the Lawyers Committee? Did you see that, Dominique? Of course we do. We all work together. Remember, I was the former president for 26 years of the Lawyers Committee.
And Monday, and
right.
I'm going to cut you off, but I know that this is an important question.
Yes, please.
Because Damon is a good friend of mine.
Yes.
And there is compliments of what we do, how we operate. Keith Ellison will tell you when our conference was in Memphis, Keith Ellison and some other AGs were on that stage training the lawyers about the strategy.
That's right.
putting forward. The NBA is the oldest association of these Black lawyers that has come together, but we never left the struggle alone. We only are here to make sure that we do what we're supposed to do, which is train those lawyers up. The other entities, the Lawyers Committee, goes out and sues people for their acts and whether they're alleged. Keith Ellison goes out and makes sure that he's protecting the interests of the people. The National Bar Association is the training ground and has always been, and we stand to complement and to help in this effort, and we will continue to do so. Sorry, Barbara. I just wanted to make sure that people knew that.
Right. Oh, no, you're right. And I just want people to know, I founded election protection. So come on, we're going to always be tight with all those entities, all those 180 something partners. But Keith, people are interested in this thing about the cities that, filed. And I know Atlanta was one. And I know that there was, Atlanta, Baltimore, of course. Boston and others don't, and people are saying, how do we kind of get our people involved as a me guy?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. So, and by the way, everything that Dominic said I just want to say thumbs up to it. He's absolutely right. But I will say that when it comes to getting our folks out in the cities, folks, you just got to knock on doors. You should all start an apartment program. Why an apartment program? Because sometimes the managers won't let you in. Sometimes the managers don't know they should let you in, that people have a right to receive voting information. That means that you need to get, when you're on your campaign, and I'm not talking about a candidate campaign, I'm talking about any kind of get out the vote campaign. You need to go down to the city hall, get all the multifamily dwellings, get the list, get the addresses, figure out who lives in them places, send letters to the managers, send them the state law if the law allows you to get in, and do this I'm talking about do this in June. And then you want to organize captains in every building, and then you want to have a series of events. Here's the thing. We've asked non-voters why they don't vote. And the biggest reason is not ideological. The biggest reason is nobody asked them.
True.
And so we have to have an ask campaign. And here's the other thing. Social pressure works a lot. If you say, look, all your family's voting, everybody in your church is going, everybody in your floor is going, then there'll be a lot going to then. So people tend to work that way. So we need to help make it a group thing, a fun thing, create a little bit of buzz around it, and then you will increase turnout big time. And I'll tell you this, I really believe we've got to make sure that we hit our campuses hard. I will say one thing on ideology. A lot of young people are very concerned about the war in Gaza. Been extremely concerned about it. And some of them are thinking, well, I'm not going to vote because of this, because I'm not voting for Trump, and I'm just not going to vote. My thought is, it's not about the person, it's about the seat. Now, let's go back to where we started. Right now, all three of the judges who are on the panel considering Arkansas NAACP versus Arkansas Board of Appropriate,
Board of Apportionment.
District Apportionment. Yeah, all of them were Republican appointees. Two of them, the ones who authored the opinion, who wrote the ugliest opinions. Really, I just think they were trying out for the Supreme Court, quite honestly. They're hoping that if there's a Trump presidency, that they can get on. So, I mean, if you like you making decisions about your body, you need to think about the Supreme Court. If you like you making decisions about who you're voting, then you need to think about that. And then you need to think about the president. So then it gets out of, is he old? Is he not? Do I like this and that? No, we're talking about our interests. It's the seat, folks. And y'all know that. Everybody on here knows that. But you asked me about how to persuade people on these campuses and in these cities, and you got to help them understand that it's bigger than just, would you like to have a beer with somebody? It's bigger than that, and it has a lot to do with your private reproductive choices, immigration, all kinds of stuff. But one last thing I want to say, do not just go knock doors to win an election. Knock doors to build a relationship. You build a relationship and the election suddenly is no brainer. If I go to Reverend Johnson and he only sees me during October when I'm trying to get a vote for him, and he don't see me again until next October, then on the 3rd October, he's gonna say, oh, I know what you want. But what if I'm working with him during the summer? What if I'm working with him on payday lending? What if I'm working with him all the time? Then I say, hey, Reverend Johnson, you let me speak to your church. You're like, who else am I gonna let speak? Of course, get up here, man, when you coming. So my point is, it's a relationship, not just a vote. We got to break out of the transactional and get into the relational, and that will be a big deal.
And Daryl, and just one last one from the audience, and then I'm going to stop. And the other one, in Cliff, I know you in Virginia definitely got something to say about this one. People are saying, well, if the polls are problematic with challengers and threats or whatever, shouldn't people just, absentee ballot? Shouldn't people just, do early voting absentee? Isn't that, better? I'm curious because I know what I would say, but what's your answer to that question from the two of you?
Brother Cliff, why don't you go first? Get your mic drop moment as you always do.
I don't know about all that. But honestly, it really depends on the state, right? I'll just speak from our perspective in terms of the states where we work, because there are some states where, it's easier to say, let's focus on early vote, right? There's some states where we do our work, as y'all know, that don't have early vote. Like that's a topic in and of itself. In fact, I was talking to one of our partners in South Carolina, and one of the things, they just sued the state like 10 days ago because they're suing to get no excuse early voting for people under 65, which currently exists for people over 65, right? And so part of it just depends on the state and what their practices are and what all the options are. So do they have early voting? Do they even have a vote by mail option? And then, of course, voting in person on election day. And there are some states where, honestly, we really try to, put more energy into getting folks to early vote than to doing vote by mail. We saw in Georgia, after they passed the voter suppression law, SB 202, that in the year immediately following that there was a substantial, quantifiable increase in the number of absentee ballots, vote by mail ballots that were rejected, which guess what? Is exactly what we told them was going to happen. And more importantly, was exactly what their intention was. And so, during the next cycle, we had to try to get folks to, trying to educate folks around the new policies and how to minimize the rejections, but honestly trying to get more people to go early vote because we just didn't trust Georgia and the vote by mail system. So it really it really depends on the state, and it depends on the practices and the different options, and then how comfortable you are in that state with the level of awareness raising and education. Have we raised awareness so much that we feel like we can still participate in that particular voting method and have it not be impacted, or do we really want to put more energy into other methods like early voting or steering people towards same day? And it just really depends. There's no one answer. There's no cookie cutter approach. Right. And that's why we rely on the folks that we work with in all these states, in the local communities, in those counties, to really give us feedback on what the best options are for them.
And I'm going to just piggyback, Barbara. So I would encourage folks to go to vote411.org. That's a one-stop shop that we have at the League to create your voter plan. And I would say nobody goes to the airport and just shows up and then figures out what plane they're going to hop on and where their vacation destination is. You can't just show up to the polls without a plan. So I would say encourage folks to go to vote411.org. It's a one-stop shop. You can find out whether you're registered to vote. You can register to vote. You can find out what the requirements are for your state, where your polling location is, if it's changed, because we know now that voters have had now 3 changes from since the pandemic. We had 2020 where everything was different, then 2022 where all of a sudden people wanted to take back all of the things that we were able to do before to get to the polling location, and now things are going to change again because of all the different rules that states have put in place. And so I would say go to Vote for One, make your voting plan, find out the information about your candidates. The other thing that people need to be aware of is that in some states they've actually restricted the amount of time you can stay in the booth. So if you're a person with disabilities or you need additional support, you want to make sure that you have that plan in place so that you know exactly who you're voting for. You can do this as quickly as possible and not have to deal with those kinds of situations happening. So I would just say get your voting plan in place and make sure everybody you know has a voting plan so that you can go in there as an educated voter.
That's awesome. Daryl. That's awesome.
Thank you for that, Virginia. Barbara, there's a saying that we started back in 2020, right? Plan your vote and vote your plan.
That's what I was thinking of.
Don't wait, start planning your vote now. So one of the things I want to throw out to this panel is I raised it as an example of what could be done, and in the state of Missouri, or in the state of Arkansas, or in any of the North, South Dakota, etc., those 8th Circuit cases, that if there is an effigy of a Black person that is hanging at a polling place with a sign that says vote, that there would not be standing for an individual to be able to do anything. And I thought it was just an example, but Denise Lieberman has told me that that's an actual example of what happened in Missouri. It happened. It happened. So when we hear this example, Denise and members of the panel, if this 8th Circuit decision is to stand and to be the law of the land, and we know 14 states, as Barbara's indicated, have state attorney generals that have signed on and said this should be the law.
Right.
Where does this leave us for this 2024 election? I mean, does that underscore the importance of it? Help me, somebody.
Yes, well, I'll jump in there. I put in the chat the pledge that we have developed at the Transformative Justice Coalition, and it is our hope that from this day of action through the rest of this month, through African American History Month in February, as we prepare for the Selma Jubilee in early March, and onward, that we will get hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people to take the pledge. We want people to sign the pledge, and we want people to share the pledge, and to get your civic organizations and your houses of worship, your college campuses, and everybody that the people in your building, as Attorney General Ellison was saying, go to all the buildings in the town.
Yes.
Everybody takes the pledge. And the pledge simply says that I will do everything to protect the vote. I will do it all. The fight for voting rights continues. This is the 95th birthday of Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and in his spirit, and other civil rights champions like Congressman John Lewis, Fannie Lou Hamer, I, Cynthia Robbins, pledge a new intensity to carry forth his dream, to make real the promises of democracy, to walk in the sunlit path of racial justice, and to advance the cause of voting rights in every way possible. I vow to vote in 2024. I will protest any and all efforts to weaken voting rights under the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and I will press for the passage of new federal voting laws like the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. I will fight to further protect the right to vote against any voter suppression attacks throughout the nation, including in the 8th Circuit. I will do everything in my power to protect our vote. This is something that all of us can do. So I urge this as a direct action out of this panel and out of this day of action going forward.
Amen.
I actually wanted to jump in on this as well and say how people can get involved, especially the Gen Z and millennials. Now, when we talk about this noose in a polling place, it's shocking, right? But how do we still encourage people to vote, knowing that there are fear tactics constantly being put in place to keep us from the polls? Someone even said, it's not that I want you to show up and to vote for a certain person. I'm not just trying to increase the campaign for one person. I need to teach you why your vote matters, period. Why you should have the will to protect your own vote. Why you should have a fire in your belly when you're approaching a polling place, as to where nothing can scare you. And as MLK, in honor of his name, has said, regardless of race, creed, color, gender, sexual orientation, we need you at the polls. Why? Because we have never won a fight with just one community involved. So we need every single person. How can you get involved? I'm going to actually give you a couple of ways, especially my Gen Z and millennials. Now, the first one, we've already hyped it up, so I'm going to say it one more time. Get involved in the TJC Fellowship Program. I've been on 5-6 tours with TJC, all the way from leading protests in Selma, Alabama, protecting votes in Wisconsin, registering people to vote in Atlanta. You can get involved in so many ways, and you do not have to know everything about voting in order to have a say and to ask your community to stand together and to vote. The next one is you can work election protection. You don't just have to go to the polls, put in your vote, and go home and that's it. Or post a flyer about, I voted with my sticker today, and go home and be silent. You need to remind your community that you are not just voting in the name of yourself, but of those in your community, of your children and your children's children. That's why we're showing up. So election protection, I've done it. I've gone into jails, and I've actually registered people to vote in jails in Chicago, in Cook County Jail. Why? Because again, they deserve a play in the political process. And you do not have to be an attorney to do that. That is something everyday citizens can do. And you can actually watch polls in your community to block these fear tactics. Also, last but not least, your politicians have to answer to you. You should be able to call any politician, both state and federal, and say, hey, I want to know what you have on the agenda next season and why you're running. And will you work on this? I want to know when's the last time you've helped this community down the street that still has broken sidewalks. Even if it's your school board, they have to answer to you. There are so many races that you can play a role in if you choose to in a partisan way. But the biggest goal, I believe, especially among our young people, is to encourage this generation to show up to the polls. And these are just a few ways that you can encourage them to see the value in their vote.
Thank you so much for that, Ashley. And we talk a lot about the youth and Gen Zs, and Attorney General Elson coming right to you, youth and the Gen Zs being involved. Attorney Elson, I know you wanted in on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know that in a lot of states, if you are on felony probation or parole, you can vote. The law just changed.
Right. You can.
The law in Minnesota just changed. 55,000 brand new people can vote. So when we look at cultivating voters, where to find them? We do need to be in the jail. We do need to be in the prison. We do need to be in, and we do need to be armed with information, because a lot of people have heard how like DeSantis and them have arrested people and stuff, thinking they could vote. So we got to be prepared to support people, but we need to have some voting, get some turnout groups focused on the captive nation and making sure they have a voice as well. So I just want to make sure we don't forget that.
Oh no, you're in my kitchen now, Attorney General. Let me tell you, when we start talking about the felony disenfranchisement, right? Part of what really upsets me, and Dominique, you got to help me on this one. Part of really what upsets me is that depending upon the state that you're in, your right to vote after a returning citizen differs. In Mississippi, at one point, you couldn't vote unless the General Assembly voted to allow you to be able to vote as an individual. At one point, that's now on appeal. But Dominique, one of the answers to all of this is the Freedom to Vote Act and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to stabilize it across the board. You have good relationships with the White House. Do you feel as though this is something that's being pushed? We know Vice President Harris is now speaking out on it.
Well, look, I'm not here as a surrogate for any political party. I'm here to represent the National Bar Association. But in speaking of that, I will say that this administration has appointed more people of color to the federal bench than any other administration before. They put more Black women on the bench than any administration before. And if you are interested and curious about how you change the laws and protect the rights of people, you start, as we have talked about before, by making people that look like you put them on the bench to protect those rights. So now, that was my little soapbox on that point. But Brother Jones, you're right. When you're talking about the making streamline the opportunity for the votes, for the right to vote for people, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act is critical. It is fundamental to ensure that we all have the same fundamental rights across the board. And all these things that we're talking about will assure that regardless of which state you're in, that there is uniformity with how those laws are implemented, and the federal government has a critical place, a role to play in this process. And so I have urged, and the National Bar Association has been urging the passage of the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act. We will continue to do so. And this goes back to my earlier comments when, just as we were talking about, there's going to be some misinformation in this general campaign. There's going to be people who are attempting to ensure that you don't know how the process works. I was just in Florida, and you're right, Attorney General Ellison, there are people that are getting arrested because when they got out of jail, they were given a card, told them that they had the right to vote. They went to go vote, and then they told them that you were intentionally violating the laws of Florida because you were trying to vote and you knew you didn't have the right. How does that work? You gave me a card, you gave me a voter ID, you told me that I could go vote, and then when I go do it, you tell me now I'm breaking the law. And now you're putting those people back in a cycle of creating a felony all over again. It is critical that we make sure that we, the lawyers, are providing all of the activists, all of those who are registering people to vote, this information, because when you get to those ballot boxes, we want to make sure that you're protected. And that is essential to election protection. That is exactly what the National Bar Association does day in and day out, election after election.
And you're right on.
If I could piggyback off of what everyone's saying.
Assault in the womb to in Florida when they tell them, you need to pay your fines and fees, but we can't tell you the amount. Christian, I know you want in.
Yes, thank you, Daryl. Well, I just want to add to what the election protection side, but on the side of an advocate and an activist in a community is a part of not only giving the get out the vote information, but also issue-based and making sure everyone fully understands the issues that are out there on the ballot and going where people are in the community. I hear we're talking about it with the vote and those who are trying to maintain their vote and maintain their right to vote when they're coming out of the jail system, but also people who are elderly and people who are disabled and women and everyone. We need to make sure that we are informing them completely, going to where they're at, about what are the issues that are going to be out there and on the ballot for them, and the things that are going to impact them and why it's important, the issues that are impacting them, and they fully understand it. Because sometimes I feel like we automatically assume people know how to read a ballot. We assume that they know what ballot issues are. They understand how to use it and how to fill it out. And we're quick to say, protect the vote and we have to get out there and vote. But I think sometimes we're speaking from our language and our level of education. And so I think we have to take time sometimes to go where people are at. And this is my social worker in me, and and go out there and break it down a little bit further and just make sure people fully understand what this looks like. What are you doing? When you check yes, what does checking yes mean? When you check no, what does checking no mean? And then what are these issues and how do they impact you on your every single day life? And I think that can also help with that process of making sure people understand and why are you going to show up and how do you show up, and doing it a little bit further and giving them a little bit more information. I know now we have a GOTV grant campaign where we give out to our members and people who want to do grants to go out to those communities and meet them where they're at so that they can actually go and do this issue-based work, because we're nonpartisan, and making sure people fully understand what these issues are and understand how they impact them, because it's more than just voting, but it's also how is this impacting my every single day life. So I just want to put that in, whatever the wonderful things everyone else is saying. It's also your issues and how those issues are impacting you. And do you understand these issues and how they are going to be carried out if you vote this way? And that's all.
And thanks, Keith. And thank you so much, Kristen, for those comments. And thank you, Keith. You're saying you have to go. Thank you so much. We're about to wrap. We won't be much longer, but thank you for your leadership. That's everything in this fight. And we can't wait to see the progressive AGs presenting themselves in this 8th Circuit case and working with us to fight voter suppression all around the country. Thank you.
And Barbara, as we start moving toward the closure on this, I want to start by asking Cliff really a question, if I may. And we talked about the effigies being hanged in Missouri. Cliff, from your experiences with BVM or anybody else on the panel for that matter, are there other similar instances that you have heard of recently that are around the country to intimidate voters from voting, to stop them from voting?
Yeah, I mean, like I was laughing, chuckling because we've experienced some ourselves directly. I often tell people we back in 2020 had a Trump supporter that pulled a gun on some of our staff and partners at a polling place because she didn't like the fact that they were giving out food and water. There are other examples of places where people talk about that the power structures have the powers that be have people that will watch you as you're going in to vote, and they're taking note of the fact that you voted, and even asking about who you're voting for, suggesting that there's a certain way that you want to vote. And this can be intimidating, not just because of threats of physical violence, but it happens to be the owner or the manager of the biggest employer in the county, right? Or the manager of the bank that carries, most people's bank loans or something like that. So sometimes it's not even the physical intimidation that we hear about, it's the other forms, other aspects of even the economic intimidation that we hear about. And then related to that is and more directly on the physical, is that it's not just voters, it's also poll workers, right? We of course know about the examples from here in Fulton County, Ruby Freeman, and the kinds of threats that she was facing, she and her daughter were facing, but it's not just them. We're seeing increasing numbers of poll workers that are being intimidated and threatened with violence if they don't do certain things, and being accused of rigging elections against Trump and all this other stuff. And so we're seeing a lot of that in different forms, and sometimes it's state sponsored, state led intimidation, like the voting police in Florida, or some of these other places where it's the sheriff's deputies or Secretary of State investigators. But sometimes it's state sponsored intimidation, and then sometimes it's this third party vigilante intimidation, which still has a state component to it, a governmental component, because oftentimes they are facilitated, amplified, or protected by state actors, right? A la Trump saying, "Hey, stand by, stand back and stand by," right? You see that's the most known example, but you see other examples where when this intimidation is complained about, that law enforcement, sheriff, or whoever just kind of shrugs it off and doesn't really do anything about it. Interestingly enough, in a meeting with the vice president last week, she raised the point that the Department of Justice has actually done a good amount of work, and even prosecutions in regards to threats against poll workers. It's not something that we hear a lot about in the news, but that's one example of the administration, trying to do what they can at the federal level to give greater protections to poll workers against this intimidation. So yes, it's a real thing. We see it all the time. We have to be aware of it. We've got to create different mechanisms of dealing with it, and those mechanisms have to include federal responses, sometimes our own self-determination responses, obviously our legal responses, but it's just something that we need to be aware of. We shouldn't have to deal with it, but if we know we coming, we have to be prepared, and we will beat it. At the end of the day, that's the thing. It's important that we're aware of all this, but we don't want it to weigh on us, right? Because at the end of the day, again, when we come together and plan the work, we can beat all of this. There's nothing that they can throw at us that we are not prepared to counter if we're unified and all in this together, and if we believe in our power.
I would love to jump in real quick here as well, if possible. Yeah,
Sure.
On the note of intimidation, I think there's been a particularly distressing sequence of events happening in the state of Florida. Most recently, I'm sure some are familiar with the hostile takeover of the new College of Florida. That is becoming something that's held over campus administration, campus leadership, that is preventing a lot of the positive change that youth activists want to make happen. Ever since the board of directors of New College, as soon as the president were forcibly removed and replaced with Governor DeSantis handpicked appointees, all of a sudden everything changed in Florida. Any positive attempts by young people to make changes at the collegiate level was now immediately met with the fear that if I make this type of progressive change at my university or at my campus, I'll be next. And so seeing that kind of intimidation of leadership on a university campus happening here in the state of Florida, one has to wonder, where else it will expand. Will it, reach other states? We have seen a series of anti-democratic pieces of legislation attacking our youth, attacking our Black community, attacking our Hispanic community, attacking our queer community. It is abundantly clear that our government, at least in Florida, is doing everything that it can to tell my generation that they don't care about our opinions, that they don't want us voting, they don't want us making change on our campuses. And so I think that this is done, at least on the bright side, it has really galvanized, the largest, most diverse demographic in the entire country to run for office, to make change in their communities, to actually be a part of the change that is happening on their campus. And so I think it's really important, especially with all the great community leaders that we have on this panel, for us to open the doors for Gen Z to be a part of the change, to be a part of the group. For me, 4 years ago, I was not doing what I'm doing now. I was still thinking about where I wanted to go to college. And so giving young people the tools, the resources, the training that we need to make positive change will help absolutely counterbalance this series of anti-democratic, pieces of legislation here in Florida. I think that we've been particularly successful in actually fighting back against election or limits on voter registration, limits on the student vote.
Thank you so much for that, Andres. And Barbara, I think that this panel has just done an excellent job of laying out that all voters face, young voters as well as other voters face, and the challenges that are faced in Arkansas, but not just laying out the challenges and intimidation tactics, but how to overcome those obstacles that have been prevented there, that have been laid there in their way. So Barbara, please take us home.
Okay, well, as we go home, first of all, again, thanks to this panel. Whoa, outstanding. You were absolutely fabulous. And you can't see it, but your cheering sessions. There's all these people have been sending cheers and happy notes, and we love the panel notes and talk about different speakers. I've been getting them. That's why you keep seeing me, going. I'm trying to respond to folks who are they're so thrilled by you. And I just want to say one thing, that we will have more panels. We're going to be doing at least one Tele-Town Hall every month, this year. And we're going to do some extra because we got to talk more about the young, voters. We got to talk more about Gen Z, more about, millennial votes. We got to talk about that because one thing we haven't talked about is candidates for office, that young people need to run for office. Darn it, we only have one person in Congress who is technically Gen Z or even millennial. And there should be 60 of you. 60. based on population, proportionality, eligibility to vote. So there's, so we got to get into these issues. We also need to, I want to make sure people are really clear. There are two major federal bills. The Freedom to Vote Act, that's the vote that equalizes all voting around the country. It's the one that requires, that nobody has to wait in line for more than 30 minutes. It's the one that restores the right to vote. It's the one that that deals with threats and to poll workers. It's the one that deals with, the issues of, redistricting, partisan redistricting, and strengthening the racial redistricting. That's all under the Freedom to Vote Act. That's why we got to have that act, because the John Lewis bill is critical to stop discrimination in voting, but it does not apply equally when it comes to these kinds of making sure every voter has the same right in the same states to vote, to have an absentee ballot, to be able to use drop boxes. All of that is Freedom to Vote Act. So that's why, we got to be on both. We need everybody in this fight. Please join us. TJCoalition.org is one way you can join us. You've heard about Vote411.org, which is critical resources. I love me some League. You've heard about Black Voters Matters. You've heard about so many of our groups here today from, now. All of, the National Bar. If you're a lawyer, you're not part of the National Bar. Come on now, let's do this. You heard about so many things. Let's get in here and be part of it. We want you. We need you. The 8th Circuit battle isn't going away. This is going to be one, folks, not just in the courts, but in the streets. And we intend to go to wherever. If there is a rehearing, we will be activating people. Look for the John Lewis bus. We're coming from state to state to state. We'll be in Selma for the whole Selma Jubilee. We're going to be doing things all year long, because that's what we do. We activate voters, we protect voters, we educate voters, we register voters. Don't let anybody tell you that this ends with just a discussion. We need you active. If you're young, if you're 18 to 35 years of age, please, please, please apply for our Gen Z voting training, voting leadership training that's coming up in April 3rd through the 7th. We pay for every dime of your expenses. You don't have to go into your pocketbook. We pay for every dime, or into your wallet. We pay for every dime of your expenses, all your travel, all your flight, all your accommodation, all your meals. Plus, we have bring in incredible trainers. And in addition to that, we get a stipend, cash that you can spend because we need money to survive in this world. And we know that. And your time is valuable to you, and it's valuable to us. So we are willing to make sure that you're paid. We're going to have 50 people that we're going to train. You'll be joining our core of already 450 people that we've trained over the years. So we need you. Don't let anybody tell you that you're not important. Don't let them talk you out of voting. Don't let them try to trick and deceive you. Be sure to stand up tall. Join us. Join us in this fight. Be part of this fight, because everything you do fulfills the and people call it the dream, but fulfills the aspirations and the vision of Dr. King. Thank you again to everybody on YouTube, everybody on IG, and everybody on Facebook. Thanks so much. Keep on doing what you're doing, getting involved. We will be back next month with another powerful Tele-Town Hall. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And we're going to close this out in prayer. We have one of our TJC fellows who's going to close us out. Cameron Barnes, please close this out. Take us home in a prayer, Cameron.
Cameron.
Cameron?
Cameron, you're on mute.
I think Attorney Whitfield was also coming off mute on screen. She may be able to still do it.
What's going on?
Can you do it?
Wait, what happened to Cameron?
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Bring us on home, Lynn.
If we could just all just take a moment and breathe. Lord, Heavenly Father, you have heard the work that we have set forth that needs to be done by each and every one of us, not only those that have heard it tonight, but those who will hear this tape in the future. Lord, we ask right now that you just strengthen every one of these great leaders who have spoken tonight. Gird them up, Lord, that they will be prepared for the fight, that we can take this to the people, Lord, that this will be a people's movement, and that everything that we will do will be according to your will. Lord, we just ask you to just bless us. We lay this plan before you, Lord, and ask for your blessings on it, and then lead us and guide us and strengthen us that we may carry it out. Bless every home that is represented tonight. Bless every home that watches this tape, Lord. Just strengthen us that we might do your will, that we do it to the glory of you, God, and not for our own individual glory. We thank you for the opportunity to celebrate the great man that Martin Luther King was. We thank you for the opportunity to march in his steps now and to carry out his dream. Lord, we ask that you just strengthen us and make it so we're able to do all things. And this we ask, Father, in your Son Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Daryl. Thank you.
TJCcoalition.org.
Come on now.
Thank
Let's
y'all.
do this. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful prayer.